It has become increasingly hard to discuss the potential direction that any country may take without talking about Donald Trump. No, don't click off the video. This isn't going to be another hot take on President Pussy Grabber, I swear. Instead, this is going to be a video focused on the possibility of a Trump-like candidate cropping up from outside of the US because, much as people would like to believe otherwise, these things don't exist in a vacuum, and the earth-shattering impact of the United States' most recent election will reverberate for a lot longer than 4 years. Among the many other consequences that will play out in the coming decades, the results of the most recent presidential election have served as a signal to the world that you can spew forth a rainbow of bigotry while still being an elected official for the highest level of government in a democratic state. Since the revelation of said results, there's been an increase in support for either new or existing nationalistic, isolationist, anti-immigrant parties like the Front National in France and the FPO in Austria, leading up to the respective elections in 2017 and, at the latest for Austria, 2018. Of course, this rise isn't limited to spreading its tentacles throughout Europe. One only needs to look at the United States' closest neighbors, their largest trading partners, and my home country of Canada to witness the rapid entanglement of these roots in foreign soil. In the case of Canada, whenever any concern about this problem is raised, the typical response tends to be a smug dismissal along the lines of how that there aboot could never happen in Canada, eh? A sentiment that is simultaneously disappointing and difficult to understand this level of genuine disaffection if the potential future of the Conservative Party of Canada is to be believed.
Conservative health critic and leadership candidate Kellie Leitch.
The former Minister of Status of Women under the Harper government in 2013, Dr. Leitch is one of over a dozen candidates in the ongoing race for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada. One who, along with Chris Alexander, made headlines during the 2015 election for conceiving the infamous Barbaric Culturalist Practice Hotline, which itself was nothing more than another slice of coded Islamophobia that the Conservative Party ran rampant with throughout that same year. Since then, Leitch has continued to dominate the coverage of the ongoing leadership campaign, decrying the out-of-touch elites, pursuing greater restrictions when it comes to immigration, most notably by proposing an additional new screening process that would examine if any foreigner entering the country holds anti-Canadian values, which seems anti-Canadian in and of itself, but who knows, maybe that's just my inner elitist speaking. Wanting to lock up protesters, dismantle the CBC, that being Canada's largest broadcasting network, and one of the very few to give prime time to Canadian productions, and, most shocking of all, was a letter she sent out after the results of the United States election came in that stated that she wanted to bring Trump's exciting message to Canada. She's even started to tweet like Donald, minus the whole retweeting white supremacists, although she's not devoid of their support. We'll come back to that. It should go without saying that, given the parallels between them, coupled with the disaster that the Trump administration is shaping up to be, Kellie Leitch would be a terrible choice to lead a political party, let alone a country, but in a post-Trump world, she is not unelectable, quite the opposite. In the span of a year, Leitch went from a relatively unknown name to the frontrunner in the CPC's leadership race, having raised the highest total donations and received the most coverage among all the candidates. True as it may be that the very same coverage of Leitch's preaching has come with a much welcome wave of criticism, one of the downsides with the amount of attention her antics have received, negative or otherwise, is that they have taken away focus from the other conservative candidates, nearly all of whom have their own undesirable and truly awful qualities. From Brad Truss applauded climate change denial, to Lisa Rate's abhorrent treatment of laborers and unions via legislation forcing people back to work in spite of their legal right to strike, to Stephen Blaney wanting to reinstate the niqab ban, to Maxime Bernier wanting to return Canada to the gold standard. And just so we're clear, these are the candidates that are currently in the running. There's of course the long-rumored announcement of Kevin O'Leary jumping in, because of course what we need right now is another arrogant businessman with an incredibly inflammatory attitude whose public persona of success is primarily based on their appearance on a television series and is not in any way reflective of their actual net worth or an aptitude as a businessman, mainly due to multiple failed business ventures, running a country. More and more does it seem like the Conservative Party's leadership race has become the very same circus show as the one that came to town down south that so many laid witness to over the past year, albeit with far less eyes watching the acts played by these clowns. Now the good news is that, given that the leadership vote for the Conservative Party is determined by a ranked ballot, Leitch becoming the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada is not as straightforward as it might seem, especially given that her lack of fluency in French will hurt the amount of support she'll receive in Quebec. The bad news is that she's still the current frontrunner of the race, boasting the largest support and donations of all the, as of this recording, 14 candidates, certainly the one who's received the most amount of attention. Even more alarmingly is that there is a precedent for Canada, or at least select regions of Canada, to elect a populist candidate who claims to be running on the grounds of fighting against the elite establishment, one who their supporters claim will say what needs to be said, political correctness be damned. despite them proving to be every bit as dishonest as the established candidates they ran against. Waroh presented themselves as the everyman you just love to have a beer with, while possessing a net worth in the tens of millions and hailing from an upper-class family. Waroh possessed conflicts of interest prior to holding office, and has a long history of racism, sexism, homophobia, and various forms of bigotry that all lay underneath a remarkably thin-skinned public figure that disliked engaging with the mainstream press. Remember Rob Ford? It may be hard to remember this, or in some cases accept this, but he was elected the mayor of the most diverse and multicultural city in all of Canada, despite having a history of making racist and homophobic statements long before Toronto's 2010 election, like saying how Asians are taking over because they work like dogs, and using a term I'm not going to repeat in reference to said group of people who, historically speaking, have been marginalized by Canada's various levels of government. Previous statements aside, part of Rob Ford's appeal stemmed from his presentation as a protest candidate, as an outsider who would fight for the little guy and stop the gravy train. This is in spite of the fact that Ford had previously served in Toronto City Council, and how, public image aside, Ford did no favors for the people he was supposedly a champion for by cutting back on public transportation, overspending on various projects that were later abandoned, increasing the amount of debt that the citizens of Toronto will have to pay over the coming decade, and continuing to make several outrageous statements like,
Olivia Gondak, it says that I wanted to eat her pussy, Olivia Gondak. I've never said that in my life to her. I would never do that. I'm happily married. I've got more than enough to eat at home.
Or repeatedly using the N-word, a disastrous bit of leadership that culminated in the now infamous revelation that the mayor of Toronto smoked crack. However terrible these events or the fallout may have been, the fact remains that Rob Ford was elected mayor of Toronto with almost a majority of the casted votes before making the city the laughingstock of the country for years, and his brother Doug Ford, who's echoed similar sentiments as Rob and Trump in the past, almost wound up being his successor. Speaking of the Ford brothers, the man behind Rob's campaign, Nick Kouvalis, just so happens to be the same person behind Kellie Leitch's current leadership campaign. Funny that they both happen to be hitting the same notes. Now, some might argue this example isn't reflective of Canadian federal politics, since Rob Ford was elected municipally and not federally. So, here's another one. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, there was a split in Canada's right wing with the formation of the Reform Party, a federal-level party whose platform included, among other stances, opposition to immigration and universal healthcare, and generally harbored anti-Quebec sentiments with the call to end bilingualism across the nation. A lot of these stances would eventually earn them the nickname of the Regress Party by their political opponents, which resulted in the Reform Party resorting to use a code and language such as immigration based on economic and labor force needs during later elections to disguise the more extreme policies in a similar manner to Leitch's screening for Canadian values, being a dog whistle for the same anti-immigration nationalism that the Reform Party would attract. See, even though the Reform Party never formed a government, they did grab a significant number of seats in Parliament during the elections from 93 and 97, becoming the leading right-wing party throughout the 90s when the Progressive Conservative Party essentially collapsed, with the Reform Party attracting a high amount of support from individuals who made statements like this that helped win the several seats in Ontario and sweep the western provinces. Given the success of the Reform Party when there was that aforementioned split in the right-wing vote, it wouldn't simply be irresponsible to ignore Leitch and the other openly bigoted members of the CPC that are currently in the running. It would be downright dangerous, given that one of them could conceivably win the party's leadership when there's a proven voter base that can and will support such a candidate during an election season. Recall how it wasn't too long ago when we thought Trump winning was a joke, when we thought he wouldn't make it past the primaries, and, well, look at where he is now. On the subject of historical patterns, remember when Trump was endorsed by a Klan member? Well, late last year, Kellie Leitch was endorsed by the Council of European Canadians, one of hundreds of white supremacist groups that exist in Canada. And while Leitch has said that she does not want their support, the fact that she received such a group's endorsement to begin with, the first endorsement that the COEC has given to any political candidate, especially after an interview in which she was specifically asked if she was worried about if racists might flock to her side in her message, and her response was essentially, "I'm not racist, look how diverse my supporters are," is no less troubling a development. Yes, we are seeing people withdraw their support, and several party members, both current and former, decry Leitch's Trumpist tactics, but we all know how well that went for even the most dissenting voices in the Republican Party after Trump won the nomination last year. Make no mistake, Leitch has a shot at winning the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, and in turn, winning the 2019 election, depending on how poorly the next few years play out, for Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, or a potential resurgence in support for the NDP after their own leadership election that also happens to be taking place in 2017. Remember that aforementioned split in the right between the Reform Party and Progressive Conservatives? That was eventually solved by the merging of the Reform Party's successor, the Canadian Alliance, with the Progressive Conservatives in 2003 under then leader of the Canadian Alliance and future Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. Whatever else can be said about him, the one enduring part of Harper's legacy was the unification of Canada's federal right wing to ensure that there wouldn't be any split in the vote, which hampered the PC, CA, and Reform parties throughout the 90s. Nowadays, centrist and left-leaning voters have several major parties to choose from, whereas right-leaning voters only have one. If the Conservative Party swings further to the right under Leitch's leadership, however less many of her ideas may be to some of these right-leaning voters, many of them might feel like they don't have a choice except to vote for the party rather than see an ideological opponent take power in the federal government. That same sort of apathy towards bigotry of all stripes didn't dissuade over 60 million people in the US from voting in a man who called Mexicans drug-dealing, crime-bringing rapists, and it didn't deter over 5 million people from voting in a man who both expressed and helped to normalize Islamophobic views in Canada. In many respects, Harper's 2015 campaign could be seen as testing the depths of this apathy while still having the party receive a sizable portion of the vote and representation in government. Look, I don't want to make it sound like the world is crumbling underneath everyone's feet or that Canada is on the verge of the apocalypse thanks to President Pussy Grabber, but it would be unwise to assume that the results of this election won't have any impact on the ongoing leadership campaign and future elections for what is, essentially, the only right-wing party on Canada's federal level of government. After all, we saw a similar surge in hate crimes in Canada aimed at minorities in the aftermath of this election, coupled with posters talking about white genocide and joining the alt-right, in what are supposed to be the very cities of the country which pride themselves on acceptance and multiculturalism. So what can be done to prevent this? Well, however stock an answer it may be, contacting the MP in your local riding nevertheless remains a good starting point, especially if they're a member of the CPC, and confronting them with what they'll do if Kellie Leitch does win the leadership. Whether by phone or email, hold their feet to the fire, and don't settle for anything less than a straight answer on whether or not they'll support one or any of the policies that she's mentioned in the past. But that's just a starting point. Talk to your friends and family members, help inform them about some of the remarks she's made, and the people who support she's currently attracting. If you can stomach financially supporting a party you're politically opposed to, pay for a one-year membership and join the Conservative Party to vote against Kellie Leitch, Max Bernier, Stephen Blaney, and the many other absurd candidates that are currently in the running. Lastly, keep reminding yourself this. What happened in the United Kingdom with Brexit, or the United States with Donald Trump, is not unique. To reiterate, France, Austria, and the Netherlands are all seeing their own Trump-style parties emerge as their own respective elections draw ever closer. Do not think for a second that an angry populist movement could not take root in Canada's federal politics when it happened not too far off in the past. Stop saying that this could never happen in Canada. Start saying, we won't let this happen in Canada.